We live in an invisible jungle of communication. Down there, 10 million people could be talking to each other at any one time. Their voices travelling at the speed of light are going over you, under you, and sometimes right through the middle of you. And all that because of the telephone. It is astonishing to think that if I really wanted to and had the right numbers, within moments I could be talking by telephone to pretty well anyone on just about any part of the planet.
It's quite absurd.
Today we take this communication on demand very much for granted. For most people, the thought of being without one's telephone is worse than the thought of being without one's trousers. But the story of how we got the phone and came to be so reliant on it is a story of skullduggery, death, electrocution, and enormous personal sacrifice. The high-tech dream of getting messages to fly through the air has not come easily. Pigeons have been carrying messages for hundreds of years. Off you go, Biggles. As late as the First World War, winged messengers were routinely used to carry sensitive notes across enemy lines. Biggles! Biggles! Brave military pigeons were even decorated. I can't think why. They are fantastically unreliable. And where would they pin the medals anyway? You've dropped the message! What was needed was a system where you didn't actually have to carry anything. Beacons, smoke signals, even drumming was tried. Anything to stop the skies becoming choked with all those unreliable birds. But in the 18th century, they finally cracked it. This is it. Well, actually, this is a scaled-down model of it. The real thing would have been 10 times bigger. It's called the visual telegraph, and it's absolutely brilliant. You see, it wasn't just limited to saying yes, no, on, off, fire, stop firing. This, if you wanted to, could say, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. The visual telegraph formed an enormous network that covered much of southern England. Messages were flashed across the country from stations set 10 miles apart. The 6 shutters could be arranged to symbolise the letters of the alphabet. It worked, and it was fast. Messages could be sent from London to Portsmouth in just 3 minutes. That's 2,400 miles an hour, 3 times the speed of sound. That is pretty impressive, but things were about to get much, much faster. You see, most early forms of communication used something you could see, something visible, like fire. But by the end of the 18th century, people began to realise that things would be better if they used something invisible. Electricity. People had known about electricity for hundreds of years, but it wasn't until the 18th century that they began to realise its potential for communication. In 1746, a French abbot decided to carry out an experiment on his monks. He connected them to each other and then to a battery. The monks screamed simultaneously, telling the abbot 2 things. Electricity really, really hurts, and it travels instantaneously. Electricity can go around corners, it can cover vast distances, and it's fast, very fast. It goes at very nearly the speed of light. Now, it was a British chap, writing anonymously actually in the Scots magazine, who first suggests that it could be used for sending messages. But it was an impoverished American artist who first worked out how that might be done. The artist in question was Samuel Morse. For 3 months of 1832, the 41-year-old Morse was on a boat. He was serious about art, so obviously had no choice but to leave America and come to Europe. Trouble was, the price of culture was 6 weeks in a sailing ship, each way. Slow. Very slow.
Hands to sail sailing stations! Prepare to send both to Gallant.
Morse was a man with a tragic interest in speeding up communication. Just 4 years earlier, his wife had died unexpectedly while he was away. He'd missed her funeral because the news of her death had taken so long to reach him. If only there'd been something quicker, maybe electricity.
Main mast facing square, roundly legged on hull.
Like most great inventions, Morse's breakthrough was staggeringly simple. Why not, he thought, use bursts of electricity to signify letters of the alphabet? The dots and dashes that make up Morse code were born. But not content with simply inventing Morse code, and let's face it, he did have 6 weeks to fill, Samuel went one step further and spent the rest of the voyage inventing a means to transmit it. He came up with the electronic telegraph.
Very, very simple piece of equipment. What you've got here is basically a clockwork mechanism. You wind it up here and you turn it on here. Here is your electromagnet, which is affected by the current being sent from somebody separately. This moves a bar along here, and at the end here there's a wheel that sits in a pot of ink which presses up and touches the slip, and then you can send simple messages which reads SOS, and you can read it here, ... ..
Samuel Morse's telegraph signalled the start of the race for the telephone. Electronic communication had begun. The pigeon had been replaced with a courier which travelled at very nearly the speed of light. The 19th century had changed forever.
To begin with, people just simply didn't understand how it worked. You've got a lovely case where a lady went into a telegraph office with a large bowl of sauerkraut to try and send to her son. And the cable operators explained to her this was an impossibility, and she said, well, it can't be because he was ordered to the front line by a telegram, so I'd like to send my sauerkraut to him by a telegram.
Eventually, people stopped trying to send pickled vegetables over the telegraph and began to use it to improve society. A murderer who, having done the foul deed in Slough, had escaped to what he thought was the safety of London by train. And before the telegraph, he would have got away with it. But the local police wired his description to their colleagues in London, who simply met the criminal's train and arrested him. There were international advantages too, but of course the French tried to sabotage things.
The first truly undersea cable was the one that ran from Dover to Calais, but that was a bit of a disaster because a French fisherman trawled it up and thought it was a really rare piece of seaweed and cut a section out to take back to his wife and show her.
The telegraph, despite the best efforts of French trawlermen, soon spread across the world. The first transatlantic cable was laid in 1857. Now it took seconds for a message to travel under the very ocean that it had taken Morse 6 weeks to cross. The telegraph really did change the world. It meant that newspapers could run next-day reports from around the globe. It was the Victorian information superhighway. It was the 19th century cool thing. People even met and married on it. The Daily Telegraph was so called to reflect its radical, new, confident, technological approach. The trouble is that the telegraph Morse code combination does have its limitations. I mean, sending even the simplest message on a machine that can only go ... would try your patience a bit. I mean, you wouldn't use this to send the story of the invention of the telephone, because this is a tale of greed, theft, vast amounts of money, blind chance. There's even a sprinkling of whodunit. The mystery of who invented the telephone begins in America. By the 1870s, the US Railroad and the telegraph that ran alongside it had finally conquered the Wild West, revolutionizing communication. Lots of people made lots of money thanks to the telegraph. The trouble was that a copper wire could only carry one message at a time, and there were just too many wires. The telegraph was becoming a victim of its own success. Something needed to be done. Huge